It is 3:14 in the afternoon. Somewhere a kettle is boiling with nobody in the kitchen. A traffic light on an empty intersection is cycling green to amber to red. A dog is waiting by a front door that will not open, and in a nuclear power plant in France, an operator's coffee is still warm on the desk beside an instrument panel that nobody is watching. That is the moment everything begins to unravel. Not with an explosion, not with a catastrophe, just with absence, the most total absence in the history of the planet. And what happens next to the cities, to the animals, to the machines, to the planet itself is one of the strangest stories that has never happened and might be the most revealing thing you will ever learn about the world you are living in right now. Let's start with the first hour, because the first hour is not quiet. It is the opposite of quiet. Within minutes of human disappearance, the electrical grid begins to fail. The grid is not a passive system. It requires constant, active management. Human operators balancing supply and demand in real time, thousands of times per second, across interconnected networks. Without that management, the balancing act collapses. Frequency deviations cascade through the system. Automatic shutdowns trigger. Within 2 hours of the last operator leaving their desk, most of the world's electrical grids would be dark. And darkness, it turns out, has consequences that most people never think about. Nuclear power plants are the first serious problem. There are approximately 440 commercial nuclear reactors operating worldwide. All of them require active cooling to prevent the fuel rods from overheating. When the grid goes down, the reactors automatically shut down, but the fuel rods continue generating heat for weeks, sometimes months after shutdown. Backup diesel generators kick in automatically. They are designed to run for between 4 and 7 days. After that, the fuel runs out and the cooling stops. Within 2 weeks of human disappearance, most of the world's nuclear reactors would begin to melt down. Not all at once, not identically, but the outcome across a significant number of them would be the same: partial or full core meltdowns, similar to or exceeding what happened at Chernobyl and Fukushima. Without human intervention to contain them, the contamination from those events would spread into surrounding environments, into soil, into water, into the air for decades. This is the part of the thought experiment that most people skip past because it is uncomfortable. The world without us does not start clean. It starts radioactive. But here is the thing about radiation. The planet has absorbed worse. The Chernobyl exclusion zone, 38 years after the disaster, is now one of the most biodiverse regions in Europe. Brown bears, wolves, lynx, bison, eagles, all of them thriving in the absence of human activity, in an environment that should by all measures be uninhabitable. Nature is not fragile, it is patient, and it has time. By the end of the first week, the signs of absence are already visible in unexpected places. The world's subways start to flood. Underground train systems in cities like New York, London, and Tokyo are kept dry by constant electric pumping systems running 24 hours a day. Without power, those pumps stop. Water tables, which have been pushed back for over a century by continuous drainage, begin to reassert themselves. The tunnels of the New York City subway system would be knee-deep in water within days. Within a few months, they would be completely submerged. Pets and livestock present a different kind of crisis. Approximately 900 million dogs live on Earth, most of them domestic, dependent on humans for food and water. The first days would be desperate for animals in confined spaces, pets locked in apartments, livestock in sealed barns. The ones that survived the first week would be those that found ways out, and most of them would. Dogs are resourceful. They would revert quickly. Packs would form within weeks. Within a generation or two, domesticated dogs would begin resembling their ancestors: medium-sized, cautious, territorial, social. The thousand-year project of selective breeding unwinding itself in decades. Cats, by contrast, would barely notice. They were never really domesticated in the first place, just tolerated humans who kept food nearby. By the end of the first year, the silence has a texture. Grass Grass is growing through the cracks in sidewalks. This is not a slow process. In a warm climate, tropical vegetation moves with surprising speed. Roots find fractures in concrete and asphalt and exploit them. A single growing season of unmanaged vegetation can crack and heave a road surface that took years to build. In warmer regions, urban streets would be partially reclaimed within a single summer. Buildings are more resilient, but not as resilient as you might think. The enemy of structures is not dramatic collapse. It is water. Gutters clog with leaf litter and overflow. Water runs down exterior walls instead of being directed away from foundations. It seeps into cracks in masonry, freezes in winter, expands, cracks the structure a little more. Roofs are particularly vulnerable. A modern roof, unmaintained, begins leaking within a decade. Once water enters a building, the biological processes accelerate. Mold, rot, insect colonies, then larger animals nesting in the upper floors. The building hollows from the inside. Within 50 years, most modern residential structures in temperate climates would be structurally compromised. Within 100 years, many would have partially collapsed. Within 300 years, very little above one story would remain standing in most of the world's cities. But here's where it gets strange, because some things would outlast the buildings by an enormous margin, and the things that last are not the things you would expect. The Hoover Dam would stand for thousands of years. Concrete structures of that scale and thickness degrade very slowly. The dam would eventually silt up, sediment accumulating in Lake Mead over centuries until the reservoir is no longer functional. But the physical structure itself would remain recognizable for a very long time. The highways would outlast the cities. Roman roads built 2,000 years ago are still visible today. The concrete and asphalt of the modern highway system, while slower to degrade than buildings, would leave faint geometric impressions in the landscape long after every city has been returned to forest. Future geologists, if there were any, would be able to trace the highway networks of the 21st century in the same way we can still trace ancient Roman infrastructure in aerial photographs of the British countryside. The radio signals we have been broadcasting since the early 20th century are already out there, traveling at the speed of light. The first human radio broadcasts are now over 100 light years from Earth. They will keep traveling until something absorbs them, long after the last building has fallen and the last trace of our infrastructure has been reclaimed. A sphere of radio signals expanding outward from this planet will still carry the specific electromagnetic signature of human civilization into deep space. For a very long time, the universe will know we were here, even if nothing on the surface of the planet remembers us. By 500 years after disappearance, the forests have returned. This has happened before. In 900 CE, the Maya cities of Central America, complex urban centers with populations in the hundreds of thousands, were abandoned over the course of roughly a century. Within 500 years, the jungle had grown so completely over them that European explorers in the 16th century had no idea they were there. They were not rediscovered until the 19th century, hidden under centuries of canopy growth. Our cities would follow the same pattern. Not overnight, not even within a single human lifetime, but given enough time, the Amazon would reclaim Manaus, the forests would swallow Chicago, the plains would return to what they were before the first city was ever built on them. The planet does not need us to maintain it. It maintained itself for 4 billion years before we arrived. It will maintain itself after. By 10,000 years, roughly the same span of time as the entirety of recorded human history, the most resilient traces of our presence are the things we least expect. The plastics buried in landfills, some of which will persist for hundreds of thousands of years. The plutonium in nuclear waste storage facilities, which has a half-life of 24,000 years and will remain radioactive and chemically distinct long after every city has returned to soil. Mount Rushmore, carved from granite, would remain recognizable for approximately 7 million years, not because of the stone itself, erosion will eventually smooth it, but because of how long granite takes to erode. For millions of years after our disappearance, 4 faces would stare out from a mountain in South Dakota with no one left to know whose faces they were. And then there is the ice. The ice cores drilled from Antarctic glaciers contain a record of every significant event in Earth's atmospheric history going back hundreds of thousands of years. Volcanic eruptions, forest fires, industrial pollution, all of them visible as thin chemical layers in the ice. The layer that corresponds to the 20th and 21st centuries will be one of the most distinct in the record. record. A sudden spike in carbon dioxide, in industrial chemicals, in microplastics, a signature unlike anything in the previous 400,000 years of data. Whatever comes after us, whatever intelligence, if any, eventually walks this planet again, will be able to read that layer. They will know that something happened here, something unprecedented in the history of the planet, something that left its mark on the atmosphere itself. They might not know what we were, they might not know what we built, or what we believed, or what we loved, but they will know we existed, because we changed the air. Here is the thing about disappearing. You leave more than you think. The lights go out in minutes. The buildings fall in centuries. The forests return in 500 years. The faces in the mountain last 7 million. The plastics outlast the mountain. The radio signals travel forever. What we built will be gone. What we burned will last. What we broadcast will keep going, long past the edge of anything we can imagine. We were here for a moment in planetary terms, a thin chemical layer in some future glacier, a faint signal moving outward at the speed of light. And somehow, inexplicably, that is enough to leave a mark that will outlast almost everything we ever worried about protecting.